Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL Scout and currently of Sports Info Solutions, joined by Aaron Schatz, the godfather of football analytics. We don't have the same song that they played on LeBatard show for you.
That's my theme song.
We got to get that. I don't know if we have to get rights to that for the podcast or what, but I loved seeing you on the LeBatard show the other day. I'm a big fan of that whole deal. What was that like for you? Did you have fun?
I always enjoy doing LeBatard. The way we do it is they play the shots, so I keep my answers really short. He likes me because one time I was on the show, we ended up talking about my life as a wedding disc jockey.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the weird weddings that I did. And they like to go kind of off topic on the LeBatard show. So he enjoyed that.
That's so awesome. I'd love to hear them have you and Ron McGill go head to head, talking football analytics and giraffes or something like that.
I'd love to eventually get in the studio with them, maybe for the Super Bowl this year, because we're all heading down to Miami.
That would be cool. Are there any other fun stops on kind of the media tour you've been on promoting the Almanac?
I mean, I've done a lot of local radio stuff. I did Charlotte. I've done doing Buffalo this week. Any station that wants to have me, we'll talk about the book. I'm always happy to appear in the preseason, talk about the book. It was good doing Good Morning Football on NFL Network. I'd love to do some more appearances with them. I like those guys and they like me. And we had fun talking about the season because when I brought up D'Angelo Hall was sitting in for Nate Burleson. And when I brought up a bad team, I brought up Washington. And they all thought I was like deliberately dissing on D'Angelo. Also, I was like, "Oh, but Atlanta is better." Yeah. I remember what teams you played for.
Shots fired. All right, let's get right into it. Keep it kind of short today and talk about the big news of the morning, which is the Duke Johnson trade. It seems that he has been traded to the Texans. Looks like a fourth that could become a third-round pick. Sort of interesting here. What's your initial takeaways of that deal?
Well, there's what it means for me as a fantasy projections guy, and there's what it means for me as like what is the value of a running back in today's NFL.
So it means work as a fantasy projections guy.
As a fantasy projections guy, it means work, right? It means I have to do new projections. That's a lot of receptions that I now have to find a space for in Houston. Now, they definitely needed a backup running back. So in that way, this is a good move. The thing is, first of all, on Cleveland's side, they have this kid, Dontrell Hilliard, that they really like. And he's going to be their new receiving back. I don't know if he'll get quite as much usage as Duke Johnson, especially because they are going to have Kareem Hunt in the second half of the season. But he's now for the first half of the season, he's now the backup and the receiving back. From the Houston side, I would think this means fewer receptions for Kiki Kute, who's the slot receiver, because that Duke Johnson can line up in the slot. Probably further receptions for the tight ends that Houston doesn't use that much anyway. But they were a really low team last year in terms of throwing to the running back. So if they're going to throw a lot to Duke Johnson, that's sort of a marked change in how they use their offense.
Yeah, I would think back to the article that Bryce Rossler did about targets above expectation. And inherent in any sort of a target share stat is going to be there's a lot of teammates effects. It's not just reflective on what you're doing as a receiver. And obviously, DeAndre Hopkins is a high guy who gets a ton of target share, really high in the targets above expectation leaderboards. But I can't help but think about how you mentioned the lack of usage of tight ends by Houston. And in addition to that, they haven't had much in terms of personnel with running backs that can catch the ball out of the backfield. So it's a really interesting fit from that perspective. I think DeAndre Hopkins should expect to have a less astronomical target share. I'm sure he's still a top 5 guy in the league probably, but you would think it would be somewhat less astronomical. And then like you said, Kiki Kuti kind of getting a little bit less of that short game stuff and Duke Johnson getting a little bit more of it. This does help with, if there was any target share problems in Cleveland with Landry and Beckham and all the other guys, it does free that space up a little bit. So from the Browns' perspective, this is a no-brainer, right? You're picking up a draft pick from a guy you didn't have any use for anymore, really.
Yeah, Houston last year, 13% of pass attempts to running backs, dead last in the league.
Yeah, and Duke Johnson – now, Duke the player, really good player. He has really good advanced stats. I've seen a bunch of things on the Twitters today talking about that. And a guy who's valuable as a receiver, like you were talking about. When I break down this deal, I think, how much do running backs matter? Well, so for me, if you could draft a running back in the 4th round and end up with Duke Johnson, a Duke Johnson type player with that rookie contract, it's hard for me to believe that's not going to help your team. But when you consider that you're inheriting an entirely different contract situation where he is more expensive and shorter term than a rookie would be, I think that this is really tough from Houston's perspective. I think you're basically just giving away an asset. And even though the player's an obvious upgrade, a great fit for your offense, I'd rather not spend a draft pick to get a running back that doesn't come either with a rookie contract or is just a discounted superstar, kind of like Odell Beckham in the trade that the Browns made, where they got him and they don't even have to pay his bonus.
The debate here, here's the interesting debate here, is does running backs don't matter? Is that less true for a pass receiving running back like Duke Johnson? Obviously, I mean, he's got positive DVOA both as a receiver and as a runner the last 3 years. So his efficiency stats are really good. He's got over 9 yards per reception for each of the last 3 years. That's tremendous for a running back. That means he's not just being used as a dump-off guy, right? They scheme passes for him. So that is, based on what analytics has taught us, that is a more valuable player as far as his value over average than a good runner, because the runner is so dependent on the offensive line. And I know that PFF, for example, in the analysis that they've done, they've come out with receiving backs as by far the most valuable backs, because it turns out that the most valuable parts of what a running back does are pass receiving and pass blocking. Right. So the debate is it possible that the draft pick here did make sense for Duke Johnson because he's a receiving back, and was Cleveland not valuing him enough because he's a receiving back? Although in Cleveland's case, he also duplicated a couple of other players that they already had, because Kareem Hunt is a receiving back and Dontrell Hilliard is a receiving back.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think he's more valuable than your typical running back. I agree with that. I think that the receiving is a more valuable part of the game, especially in terms of differentiating between running backs. Once you control for offensive line quality, it's really hard to differentiate yourself as a runner. But I mean, I'm looking up the contract details right now. It looks like his base salary this year is 1.8, and 3.6 next year, then 4.6 the year after that. It seems to me that that's not really necessarily like a bargain situation that you're getting here for this player. It seems to me like if it's going to be an efficient move, this has to really be your guy. You're really kind of putting your eggs in this basket if you're a believer that you don't want to put too many of your resources towards running backs in general.
Right. It's not like they're getting rid of Lamar Miller. I know everybody keeps waiting for Lamar Miller to be gotten rid of, and it never happens. So I doubt they're getting rid of Lamar Miller now either.
Right. I do love the fit, though. Again, Deshaun Watson loves to be in the shotgun. A lot of stats out there showing how efficient Duke Johnson's been out of the shotgun, and then also a very durable player so far throughout his career. I don't think he's missed any games.
I don't know if this is really going to cut into Hopkins's passes, because it seems to me he's a very different type of receiver than Hopkins. It's much more going to cut into Kiki Kuti.
But so I agree that there obviously couldn't be more different, but would it not just take away from the total target share in general from the offense, or do you think that the offense is kind of like stratifying?
Probably when I'm doing this, I may take like 4 or 5 away from Hopkins, but I can't imagine it's going to be that much. It seems like he would take a lot more away from other players. Hopkins very likely is still the most. Yeah, he's probably still the most targeted guy in the league this year.
Right, but maybe it goes from 150 to 145 in the projection.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what I have his number at, but yeah, like only by a handful.
That's a pretty decent drop for most people. A 3% drop for a lot of receivers in the NFL is a 20% drop in their target share.
Yeah.
He's just getting, he's going to get a lot of balls still, that's for sure. Okay, let's move forward to the next topic, we put out an article last week. Our scout, Nate Cooper, who is really not a researcher by trade, he put out an article on icing the kicker. He basically had the idea to go back and take a look at every icing the kicker situation and chart whether or not he was iced, whether or not the kick was made, even whether or not the kicker decided to take a practice kick. And he charted all this stuff, and he put together a really interesting little article that showed that at least over the last 5 years, icing the kicker has been an effective strategy. Now, unfortunately, and I'll be totally upfront and honest right here, the article was awesome. The work he did was awesome. I wish the data had been organized a little bit better in the future. We're working on organizing that data now so that we'll be able to do more analysis with this sort of stuff in the future. So for the time being, we had to bear with the article as it was, and some of the, less, we don't have any confidence intervals built into here or anything like that yet. We're not trying to say with any sort of definitive claims that this is something that definitely matters or definitely doesn't matter. All we were saying was over the last 5 years, this is what the research showed. And for me, the most interesting part of the article was that he interviewed Graham Gano, who pointed out, because they were talking about the practice kicks, and I always think you should take the practice kick. Graham Gano pointed out that if you take a practice kick while you're getting iced, you don't get that ball back. And that made me realize, thinking back to my time with the Saints, all the time I spent with Thomas Morstead, you usually are using the same 1 or 2 kicking balls throughout the whole game. So if you get to the end of the game with that ball, which you can't break in like the quarterback balls, you can't break them in as much throughout the week. You only get a limited amount of time with them. That's why you see the kickers always pressing on the balls and stuff like that before they kick them. You don't want to lose that ball. And then you're going to get a new ball that you haven't touched yet, that's fresh out of the box. You haven't played with it the whole game. It's like, would you go try to play a basketball game with a new fresh pair of sneakers? No, you don't want to do that. You want something that's been worn in a little bit. And so you want that ball that you trust. So that part of it made sense to me, even though Justin Tucker apparently always takes the practice kick. And being Justin Tucker, the only time he missed was on a 65-yarder.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting about breaking the ball in. Here was my problem with this analysis, was that I remember a lot of analysis that's been done that showed the exact opposite. And so what's interesting is if you look back at, for example, the analysis that was done by the guys in the book Scorecasting, that was done on a different period of time. So that made me wonder, if we looked at a longer period of time, what would the result be? Because between whatever it was, something like 2003 to 2011, their analysis showed that icing the kicker doesn't work, that it doesn't make a difference.
I had a question about that, because you mentioned that when we were talking before. So do you know how they did their analysis, how they measured what was icing the kicker versus what wasn't?
I would have to go and look it up, which I don't have time to do right now while we're recording. One thing I will say is obviously that they were not charting games. So, for example, they were not tracking whether a kicker got off a practice kick or not.
Right.
And they weren't charting whether the timeout was taken right after the previous play or whether the timeout was taken like with 1 second left on the clock, right? Because in the play-by-play, it all looks the same. It just says timeout, in order of plays. So they don't have quite the granularity of data that SIS does for this analysis. But, any analysis that was generally done on does icing the kicker work for prior data seemed to show that it didn't make a difference. Then again, Bill Connolly did an analysis at one point on college football data, and he suggested that it does make a difference. So what you end up with is a lot of different analyses of this question that are out there that disagree with each other.
So what we're going to have to do, and our next steps for this, you mentioned, he didn't have the granularity of data that SIS does. Unfortunately, we didn't have the granularity of data that SIS does as we were doing this.
Right. You could do the same analysis that Scorecasting did for 2015 to 2018, but you can't do the same analysis that SIS did for 2003 to 2011, because we're not going to go back and watch all those games and mark like what time exactly was the timeout taken and was there a practice kick and all of those issues.
Well, we can look into it. What I want to do is 2 things. Number one, I want to look into it and see, is this a sample size thing? Because that's really possible. What kind of confidence do we have that something really different is going on here? And along with that question, what I want to do is tie all this stuff into our other data so that we can do stuff like adjust for distance, potentially weather, things like that that might be impacting this, and see whether the specific, when you isolate this variable of icing the kicker, whether or not it is statistically significant. If it appears that it's nothing, then we'll come back and report that. If it appears to be that it's very strong and it's significant, we'll report that. If it seems to be significant and we need more data, then we can go back a few more years and gather a little bit more data to see if that sheds some more light on the situation. So I thought it was a great jumping off point for research. Nate asked a really interesting question. He got Graham Gano to comment on it. So really nice work by him. And I hope it's a jumping off point for lots of different people to continue this sort of analysis and develop a more definitive answer, because there are a lot of things I would call that analysis. Definitive isn't one of them.
Here's the one thing that I will say, which is that in most situations, the cost to a team to ice the kicker is nil. Mm-hmm. You have enough timeouts, and it's the end of the game, and it's not like you need those timeouts for anything else. It doesn't cost you anything. The only cost of icing the kicker is annoyance of fans. And if you're a coach, you don't care about annoyance of fans. So if you're a coach and you see that there have been 2 or 3 studies that say it doesn't work and 2 or 3 studies that say it does work, you're going to do it because it doesn't cost you anything and maybe it does work.
And in Nate's analysis, he points out that in the first half, coaches are much more likely to ice the kicker in those situations. And that makes sense because at that point in the first half, you might not be planning to use your timeouts. Whereas with 1 minute left in the fourth quarter, if you have a chance of getting the ball back, then the icing is not
right. But a lot of it is with 2 seconds left in the fourth quarter.
Left.
So you've got 2 timeouts, but there's 2 seconds left in the fourth quarter. What I wouldn't do is I would not save timeouts for the purpose of icing the kicker.
Right. I think we've got to dig more into it before we can really decide how we want to. I'm not comfortable giving a coaching recommendation, just like, when I was a scout, I wouldn't be comfortable giving a player evaluation unless I really seen it myself. So I think we got to dig in a little bit deeper there. Speaking of digging a little bit deeper, Scott Spratt did that with every roster of NFL football teams. He went through and looked at the best rosters of players 25 and under throughout the league. No surprise, Browns number 1, Colts number 2. It was an awesome article available on ESPN+. What did you think about it, Aaron?
Well, I helped him put together the list. We moved some teams up and down. Now, the interesting thing that we did this year was Scott wanted to analyze based on how much of the young talent they had on, the current inexpensive rookie contracts. So, for example, Atlanta appears lower than you would expect otherwise because, a lot of their young defensive talent is at the end of their rookie contracts, and they're going to have to pay those guys a little bit more coming up. If we were only counting just, how much are teams getting from players under 25 in the 2019 season period, then Deion Jones and Keanu Neal would have a lot more value. But one of them already has an expensive new deal, and Neal has 2 years left on his rookie contract, and they're both 24 this season. So there's only one more year of them being under 25. Right. It's interesting to see the winning teams that are at the bottom, some of which are very deep, but their depth is in older players. And Philadelphia is the best example of this because we ended up with Philadelphia as number 32 because when you look at their depth, what they have is a lot of current rookies that we don't know anything about yet. And then a lot of their depth is players that are 26 or older. So everybody's aged out of the under 25 rankings who really matters for that team except for some rookies.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you look at any sort of list and you see the Eagles and the Patriots at 31 and 32. But it does make sense when you think about that a lot of their team is a little bit older. Carson Wentz aging out of being in that 25 and under group. And then, of course, looking at, aside from the rookies that haven't really seen a lot of playing time yet, it's that these teams have kind of been built up with depth that's a little bit aged. And so that's part of what comes with being, in your window is that you're probably not going to have a lot of those guys in that situation.
Patriots in particular like to side those mid-level players, those mid-level veterans, your Rex Burkhead types, Jason McCourty types. And those guys aren't going to come out in an under 25 ranking.
Right. The guys that I'm interested to see, I think the assets that those guys, looking at the Isaiah Wynn who didn't play last year, Sony Michel, N'Keal Harry, the guys that are mentioned at, the draft picks this year, Miles Sanders, we hear a lot about the camp that he's having for the Eagles. There could be some guys that end up being on this list and end up being high value people on this list because they have those multiple years of asset value left on their rookie deals. But a fascinating read, and I definitely recommend this to all of our listeners.
Right. Obviously, it's not that Philadelphia has no talent under 25, but it's like, what's the talent Philadelphia has under 25? Well, they had 5 draft picks in the 2019 draft. Okay. There are lots of teams that had 5 draft picks in the 2019 draft. So in that way, Philadelphia is equal to all other teams. Like the rookie classes, their rookie class is somewhat equal. I mean, they have 3 guys from the top 60, but they're not the only team with 3 guys from the top 60, right? So it's not that by being number 32, they have no under 25 talent. It's just when you look at other teams, we also, we discounted running backs and we gave more credit for having a young quarterback under 25 because that's the best kind of under 25 talent to have. So that's how we ended up with Cleveland at number 1. That's why Kansas City is basically number 3 solely because of Patrick Mahomes.
That's reasonable. He's pretty good.
I mean, he seems like the best quarterback in football right now, certainly based on last year, and he happens to be under 25. The fact that they don't have a lot more under 25 talent, it doesn't matter. I mean, that quarterback is the most important position, and they've got the guy.
All right. Anything else that you wanted to talk about on that article?
No, I mean, I hope people really enjoyed it. I know Scott spent a ton of time on it. There's a lot there. He wanted everybody to be able to read about their favorite team and not just have like 3 sentences. So there's a lot there. And I hope people will definitely check it out.
Yeah, I'm sure, Scott, when you dive that deep on every team, that's a lot of work to do right there. And you can tell from reading the whole thing that he really went deep beyond the surface in describing all this stuff.
It would be funny to do the opposite, It would be funny to do the opposite and do what were the top teams based on like over 30 talent. And then to see in the next couple of years, do those teams decline? Or because of the importance of quarterback and because quarterbacks are lasting longer, is it good if you have an over 30 quarterback, that's still good because he's still going to have a number of years left.
Right. How is the correlation from this sort of thing going from year to year? How well does it predict success? Have you guys looked into that?
We haven't run an actual like correlation coefficient or anything, but I mean the Rams were number 1 on this list last year, so
that's pretty good.
They made the Super Bowl.
All right, one more article I wanted to talk about. John Shirley put an awesome article out this morning. I know he has been excited for the start of the preseason, and he gave a little write-up of the NFL rookies to watch tonight in their first preseason action. What were your takeaways from that article?
Well, he mentions like Kyler Murray and TJ Hawkinson. I think that those guys being number 1, being a top depth chart guys, I think that like other top depth chart guys, they're not going to play a lot tonight. Like I severely doubt that we see a lot of Kyler Murray tonight. What I find more interesting is lower down on some of his trying to make a name for themselves pick, like Nick Needham, Miami Dolphins cornerback, who the SIS video scouts really liked, but was only like not even a 4th round pick. He was an undrafted pick. But he's gotten even some time with the first team in camp for the Dolphins. So that's the kind of player that you really want to watch on the first week of preseason. The kind of player you really want to watch are the players that SIS really liked, but that went undrafted or were drafted in the late rounds. I'll give you another example of a guy that the Football Outsiders Playmaker Score really liked, who I believe went undrafted, and that's Dortch from the Jets. I can't remember his first name right now. He's a wide receiver from the Jets, Greg Dortch. I think he's an undrafted player. That's someone who's really interested to watch in week 1. Or Dylan Mitchell, who had a really strong playmaker rating, who was a 7th round pick of the Minnesota Vikings. That's someone who's really interesting to watch in week 1. Or someone like Nick Needham.
Greg Dortch is 5'7", 173 pounds, which gives him the distinct honor of being smaller than me, which is amazing.
But larger than Darren Sproles.
I'm sure he's a lot faster than me, that's for sure. I'm definitely excited to see Nick Needham too. He's a guy that we had circled with the quarterbacks. Just, let's all not overreact too much tonight. Whether we see a bunch of Kyler Murray or not, it's going to be vanilla stuff. It'll be interesting to see what vanilla is for the Cardinals. Like, we don't even know. Like, we're expecting so much from their offense. They're not going to show what they're really going to be doing. But I would think that we would see, the air raid as we're used to.
We're going to see the wide splits by the offensive linemen, and we're going to see the 10 personnel.
Yep. And 10 and 11 the whole game for them. And then Daniel Jones, we hear that he's going to get a whole bunch of time playing against the Jets. They're doing the Jets-Giants game at the beginning of the preseason this year as opposed to –
And that's the national game tonight. That's on NFL Network.
So a fascinating game. I hope Quinnen Williams just eats him alive if he plays at all. That would be a lot of fun. The Jets defense has some scary talent up there when you look at it. And Greg Williams in his first season, if you look throughout his career, going all the way back to when he was with Washington, Buffalo, the defenses under him always seem to perform best in year one and year two, and then kind of tail off as it starts to go in one ear and out the other over time. So I think the Jets defense could be formidable. Again, everything's going to be tailored down to being as simple as possible for Daniel Jones, and it's going to be very vanilla. So if he does well, it's probably going to be because they put him into a situation to do well. If he doesn't do well, maybe it's because Greg Williams and his guys didn't play so nice with him. But that's one that I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on. Just the curiosity.
The other interesting thing is depth charts, right? That's what the preseason is all about, is like paying attention to depth charts. And I'll give you a good national game, which is Saturday night at 9, Dallas and San Francisco. Like, the San Francisco wide receiver depth chart is such a mess. Who plays and who doesn't? Because who doesn't play gives you a good idea of who's going to play during the regular season.
Right. It could be that they're competing. It could be that they made a decision and they're keeping somebody out of there. So you don't want to react too much one way or another. All right. Well, I'm excited to get to some football. The real stuff finally on the field. We're playing NFL football.
Football, but it is NFL football.
Yeah, it beats the Alliance.
8.5, baby.
All right. We will sign off. As a reminder to everybody, please check out the Football Outsiders Almanac. It is the best breakdown, the best preview to the NFL season. You'll want it with you throughout the year. I know that it's something that I'll be constantly referring back to. And, of course, you can check us out on Twitter at sportsinfo_SIS, at FB Outsiders. I'm at Matt Mano, and Aaron is at FO_A Shots. So check it out. Follow us. Please like, rate, review. It's always helpful. And we will be back next week with more.